I'll never forget the time my sister Megan and I were left home alone on a quiet Friday night. Our parents had gone out for a well-deserved date night, leaving us to our own devices. I was 12 at the time, and Megan was 13. We lived in a modest two-story house in a suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where you could hear everything going on, even from one floor to another. The creaks and groans of the old house were something we had grown used to, but that night, things felt different. We were both doing our own thing in our respective rooms upstairs. Megan was likely lost in one of her books, while I was probably immersed in some video game, the soft glow of the screen lighting up my room. The evening was quiet, almost eerily so, until I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from downstairs in the den. It was subtle at first, barely audible over the hum of the video game, but as it persisted, it became impossible to ignore. Curiosity got the better of me, and I paused my game, straining to listen. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone was knocking on the back door. I immediately thought it was Megan trying to mess with me, so I decided to go down and catch her in the act. As I descended the stairs, the tapping grew louder, but there was something unsettling about it, something that didn't sit right. When I reached the den, the room was dimly lit by the streetlights filtering through the windows. The shadows cast by the furniture seemed to stretch and twist in the low light, giving the room an ominous feel. I hesitated before flipping on the porch light, and when I did, my heart skipped a beat. There, standing on the other side of the glass, was a man I had never seen before. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with long black hair that was starting to gray. His face was flushed, his cheeks red as if he had been out in the cold for too long. He was tall, probably around 6', and his eyes, though seemingly non-threatening, held an intensity that made me uneasy. He didn't belong here, especially not in our backyard, and every instinct in me screamed to run away. But something about the way he was looking at me made me hesitate. He didn't seem aggressive, more like he was desperate, as if he needed help. Against my better judgment, I cracked open the small window in the door to hear what he had to say. His voice was shaky as he asked if he could use our phone. I immediately questioned him. Why was he in our backyard, and why didn't he go to a neighbor's house? Instead of answering, he just pleaded with me, his voice growing more urgent. He begged me to let him in, saying it was an emergency. My mind was racing, torn between fear and the desire to help someone in need. But the fear won out. I told him I was sorry, but I couldn't let him in and that he needed to leave. When he didn't move, I added that I would call the police if he didn't go away. As I tried to slide the window shut, his hand darted out, blocking it. He started reaching inside, trying to unlock the door from the inside. Panic surged through me, and I yelled for Megan. The sound of my voice must have startled him because he quickly pulled his arm back and took a step away from the door. Megan came running down the stairs, her face pale with worry. She peeked around the corner, her eyes widening when she saw the man still standing there. Without hesitation, she grabbed the phone and called our parents. They told her to hang up and call the police immediately, and to stay upstairs until they arrived. We retreated to our rooms, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified in the silence that followed, each one sending a fresh wave of fear through me. But there were no more taps, no more sounds from downstairs, just an eerie, oppressive silence. After what felt like an eternity, my fear gave way to a reckless sense of bravery. I needed to know if the man was still there. I crept back downstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floorboards. The den was still and quiet, the only light coming from the faint glow of the porch light outside. The man was no longer at the door, but something caught my eye. The window was lower than I had left it. A cold dread washed over me as I realized I hadn't closed it properly. My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I noticed the office door was ajar. I could have sworn it had been shut earlier, but now it was open, the darkness inside impenetrable. Fear rooted me to the spot, but I knew I had to check. I slowly moved towards the door, every instinct telling me to turn back, but I couldn't. I pulled out my phone, switched on the camera, and turned on the flash. My hands trembled as I pressed the shutter button. The flash illuminated the room for a split second, but it was enough. There, hunched over my dad's desk, was the man. His head was turned towards me, his eyes wide and wild, as if caught in the act. He looked like he was about to lunge at me, his body tense, ready to spring. I didn't wait to find out. I bolted upstairs, my feet barely touching the ground as I ran. I slammed the den door shut and locked it, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The familiar light tapping began again, but this time it was on the den door, and I could hear him whispering, pleading with me to let him in. I cried out for Megan, my voice cracking with fear. In a desperate move, I yelled through the door that the police had arrived, hoping it would scare him off. The tapping stopped abruptly, and I heard the back door creak open and then slam shut. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then, the man was long gone. They searched the house and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of him. The officers told us we had done the right thing by not letting him in, but their reassurances did little to calm the fear that had taken root in my chest. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every rustle in the night made my heart race. I often found myself waking up in a cold sweat, my mind replaying the image of the man's face, the way his eyes had locked onto mine as if he could see right into my soul. Even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers in the back of my mind. The sense of violation of having someone so close, yet so dangerous, in our home is something I'll never forget. It's a reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be and how quickly it can be shattered. If you've made it this far, you're 100% a horror fanatic and we approve. If you love our campfire-themed horror storytelling experience, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads. It was a crisp autumn weekend when my father, Cliff, decided to take his girlfriend's younger brother, Adam, on his first hunting trip. Adam had always been eager to experience the thrill of the hunt, and my dad was more than happy to introduce him to the sport. They planned to spend the weekend at a secluded hunting cabin deep in the woods of Braxton County, West Virginia, a place my dad had visited many times before. My father had called ahead to his uncle, who owned a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere. The land was vast, covered in dense forests and rolling hills, a perfect spot for hunting. His uncle had agreed to let them use his cabin, assuring my dad that they would have plenty of deer to hunt. As they drove deeper into the wilderness, the roads became narrower and more treacherous. The dense forest on either side seemed to close in on them, the towering trees casting long, ominous shadows. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was a deep shade of purple. The cabin was not what they had expected. It was small, much smaller than my dad remembered, with only 2 rooms and a rickety porch that creaked with every step. The wooden exterior was weathered and worn, and the windows were bare, with no curtains to block out the night. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit by a few old lanterns, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. My dad and Adam unloaded their gear, setting up their sleeping bags on the narrow cots that lined the walls. The cabin felt cold and unwelcoming, a stark contrast to the warmth and comfort of home. But they were determined to make the best of it, eager for the hunt that awaited them in the morning. As they settled in for the night, the stillness of the forest outside seemed to seep into the cabin. The only sounds were the distant hoots of owls and the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind blew through the trees. Adam, who had been excited just hours before, now seemed uneasy, his eyes darting towards the dark windows. "Are you sure it's safe out here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," my dad replied, trying to sound reassuring. "We're miles away from anyone. It's just us and the deer." But Adam couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. He kept glancing towards the windows, his imagination conjuring up images of wild animals or worse, something more sinister lurking just out of sight. The unease only grew as the night wore on. Around midnight, they heard a loud clanging sound outside, like metal trash cans being banged together. Adam sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's probably just a bear or something," my dad said, trying to sound casual, but even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. "Go back to sleep. We got a long day tomorrow." But sleep was impossible. The sounds outside continued, growing louder and more persistent. It wasn't just a bear. They could hear what sounded like footsteps crunching on the gravel outside, moving closer to the cabin. My dad lay still, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the sounds outside. Then, without warning, there was a loud scraping noise, like nails or claws being dragged down the side of the cabin. The sound sent a shiver down his spine. "Cliff, there's something out there," Adam whispered, his voice filled with fear. "Stay quiet," my dad replied, his own voice barely above a whisper. He reached for his rifle, the cold metal reassuring in his hands. He motioned for Adam to do the same, and together they lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds outside. The scraping noise moved along the side of the cabin, stopping just beneath the window next to Adam's bed. They could hear something or someone outside, moving around, almost as if it were searching for a way in. And then it started, the tapping. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder with each passing second. It was coming from the window, a steady, rhythmic tap, 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 as if someone was knocking on the glass. Neither of them dared to move. The tapping continued, relentless and unnerving. My dad's mind raced, trying to figure out what was outside. Was it an animal, drawn by the smell of their food? Or was it something more sinister, something with far more malicious intent? He glanced over at Adam, who was clutching his rifle with white-knuckle hands. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. My dad knew they couldn't just sit there, waiting for whatever was outside to make its move. "Load your gun," he whispered, his voice tense. Adam nodded, fumbling with the bullets as he tried to load his weapon. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. My dad took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He couldn't see anything outside. The darkness beyond the windows was too thick, but he could feel it. The presence of something out there, something that didn't belong. The tapping stopped suddenly, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. My dad's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear anything else. And then, without warning, there was a loud bang on the wall, followed by the sound of footsteps running away from the cabin. Neither of them moved for what felt like an eternity. They just lay there, clutching their rifles, waiting for something else to happen. But the only sounds that followed were the distant calls of owls and the rustling of leaves in the wind. When dawn finally broke, they didn't waste any time. They packed up their gear and left the cabin as quickly as possible, not even bothering to cook breakfast. As they drove away, my dad couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped something terrible. They returned to my dad's uncle's house, their nerves still on edge. When they told him what had happened, he just laughed it off, insisting that they were probably just imagining things. But my dad knew what he had heard, and so did Adam. Neither of them ever went back to that cabin again. The memory of that night, of the tapping on the window and the scraping along the walls, was enough to keep them away for good. Even now, years later, my dad refuses to talk about it. He says it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bear. But there's a look in his eyes when he says it, a look that tells me he doesn't really believe that. Whatever was out there that night, it wasn't just an animal. It was something far more unsettling, something that still haunts him to this day. I was 19 years old when I landed a job at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and I needed the money. The motel was the kind of place that had seen better days: faded paint, cracked signs, and a clientele that was more interested in keeping a low profile than enjoying a good night's sleep. I worked both as a desk clerk and a housekeeper, which meant I got to deal with the customers coming in at all hours of the night, and then clean up the messes they left behind in the morning. It wasn't uncommon for the cops to show up multiple times a week, responding to everything from noise complaints to drug busts. It was a sketchy place, to say the least. One afternoon, I was assigned to clean the rooms in the second building of the motel, the one furthest from the office. I hated working over there. It was always eerily quiet, with most of the rooms vacant and the atmosphere heavy with neglect. The rooms were old and worn down, the kind of place you wouldn't want to spend more than a few minutes in if you could help it. I was in one of the last rooms on my list, trying to finish up as quickly as possible. It was getting late, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The room I was cleaning was vacant. so I was surprised when I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I was wiping down the mirror above the dresser when I noticed something in the reflection. A man standing in the doorway watching me. He was in his mid-50s, with dirty, greasy hair that hung limply around his face. His clothes were rumpled and stained, and he had a smell about him, like car oil mixed with alcohol. Startled, I spun around, nearly dropping the cleaning supplies in my hands. "Oh my God, you scared me," I blurted out, trying to keep my voice steady. The man just stood there, a crooked grin spreading across his face. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me with a look that made my skin crawl. There was no reason for him to be in that room. The room was supposed to be empty. I remembered the recent staff meeting where my boss had emphasized the importance of customer satisfaction, urging us to be polite and helpful to the guests. So, despite the alarm bells going off in my head, I forced a smile and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with, sir? Towels, maybe?" He just kept grinning, and then slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill, holding it out towards me. My heart skipped a beat. No one tips $100 for cleaning a $40 a night room. "My name's Terry," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. "I'm staying in the room next door with my wife, Sherry." He chuckled, as if their rhyming names were some kind of joke. But there was something in his eyes, something dark and unsettling. I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. "That's nice," I said, glancing at the door, hoping he would take the hint and leave. But he didn't move. "I was watching you," he continued, his grin widening. "Me and my wife, we were watching you. We thought maybe you'd like to come have some fun with us." My heart stopped. I felt like I was going to be sick. "No, I'm sorry, I can't do that," I stammered, taking a step back. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to get away from him, but he was blocking the door, my only exit. The man's grin faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "Come on," he said, his voice softening, taking on a more menacing tone. "It'll be fun. Just come over and say hi. Sherry's real nice, you'll like her." I shook my head, backing away until I was pressed up against the dresser. "No, I really have to finish my work," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, just go back to your room." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me, his eyes boring into mine. Then, finally, he grunted and turned away, shuffling out of the room. I watched him go, my body frozen with fear. As soon as he was out of sight, I slammed the door shut and locked it. My mind was racing. There was no wife. This man was dangerous, and I had narrowly escaped something terrible. I needed to call for help, but when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. The line was dead. Panic set in. My cell phone was outside on the housekeeping cart, but getting to it meant opening the door, and I wasn't sure if Terry was still out there. I cracked the door open just enough to peek outside. The coast seemed clear, so I hurried out, frantically searching the cart for my phone. Just as I found it, I heard Terry's voice again, shouting to someone I couldn't see. "She's running. She's getting away." I didn't wait to see who he was talking to. I bolted, running as fast as I could towards the office. My heart was pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer with each step. I rounded the corner and spotted the stockroom. Without thinking, I ducked inside and locked the door behind me. I could hear them outside, Terry and someone else, their voices low and urgent as they searched for me. I crouched down in the corner, my hands trembling as I dialed the number for the front desk. My boss answered, his voice calm and reassuring, but I was too scared to make sense of his words. All I could think about was Terry and the other man still out there, still looking for me. I stayed hidden in the stockroom for what felt like hours, waiting until I was sure they had given up. When I finally made it back to the front desk, I collapsed into my boss's arms, the adrenaline leaving me weak and shaky. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, Terry and his accomplice were long gone. They searched the motel, but there was no sign of them. It wasn't until later that I found out Terry was wanted for a string of violent crimes, including sexual assault and kidnapping. I had narrowly escaped becoming his next victim. A few weeks later, Terry was finally caught, but the experience left me traumatized. I quit my job at the motel soon after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, of knowing that someone out there had wanted to hurt me. Even now, years later, the memory of that day haunts me. The fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that I was so close to something terrible. It's something I'll never forget. I've moved on with my life, but the scars from that experience will always be there. A reminder of just how fragile our sense of safety can be. Back in high school, I was on the basketball team, not because I was particularly good at it, but more to have something to add to my college resume. One night, we were playing a game against a nearby school, though I can't recall the name of it now. It wasn't an important game, and the bleachers were sparsely populated. We were losing by about 22-13 when one of the kids on the opposing team started trash-talking me and a few of my teammates. His main target, though, was me. He kept making fun of my size and my hair, throwing jabs every time I missed a shot. It got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. My frustration boiled over, and in a fit of anger, I shoved the kid as hard as I could. He flew backward, sliding off the court, and suddenly everything stopped. My teammates held back his, the refs blew their whistles, and I was ejected from the game. But I didn't care. It felt too good to feel bad about it. I stormed past my coach, ignoring the look of disappointment on his face, and headed straight for the locker room. When I reached the door, I found it locked for some reason. Not wanting to face my coach again and to ask him for the key, I decided to go outside and enter the locker room through the back entrance. That door was rarely used, but to my surprise, it was open. As I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was how cold it was in there, almost as cold as it was outside. It was eerie. The door must have been open the entire game. The lights were off, and I didn't have my phone with me to use as a flashlight. I closed the back door behind me, and as I started feeling my way along the walls to find the light switch, I heard something. A locker clicked shut somewhere in the darkness. I called out, "Who's there?" assuming it was one of my teammates, but there was no reply. The darkness in the room wasn't complete. I could still make out shapes and shadows, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I began walking slowly down the aisles of lockers, scanning each one for any sign of movement. As I walked, I could hear footsteps, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the room. I wasn't alone. When I reached the last aisle, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. At the far end of the row, a large figure was moving behind the lockers, almost as if it were trying to hide. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get out of there as fast as I could, so I turned and headed back toward the main entrance, but when I reached it, the door was locked from the inside too. In a panic, I fumbled for the light switch, and when the fluorescent lights flickered on, I felt a small wave of relief. The return of light gave me enough confidence to confront whoever was in the locker room with me. I began circling the aisles again, but this time I was more determined. However, no matter how many laps I made, I couldn't see anyone. Yet the footsteps continued to follow me, always opposite from where I was, as if someone was mirroring my movements. I called out repeatedly, but I was met with nothing but silence. Then I noticed something I had before. The lockers had tiny holes in them, small enough to be unnoticeable unless you were looking closely. An idea struck me. I could look through one of those holes and see who was on the other side. Quietly, I got down on my knees and pressed my eye to one of the holes. At first, I saw nothing but darkness, and I thought maybe I was imagining things. But then I realized with a jolt that what I was staring at wasn't darkness at all. It was an eye. Someone was looking back at me. I didn't stick around to find out who it was. I bolted for the back door, my heart pounding in my chest, and ran faster than I had ever run in any game. When I found my coach, who looked understandably annoyed, I told him there was someone in the locker room. At first, he dismissed it as probably being the janitor, but when he saw the fear in my eyes, he believed me. He signaled the refs to pause the game, explaining that there might be an intruder in the locker room. Half of my team and the coach went in to investigate, but by the time they got there, whoever it was had already gone. The back door was still open, and the room was freezing cold. We later discovered that 4 of my teammates were missing clothes from their lockers, all from the freshman aisle. I shuddered to think what kind of person was in that locker room with me that night. I'm just glad I never found out. My younger brother is a hockey player, but since he's only 13, I'm often the one who has to drive him to his games and practices. His team plays at an outdoor rink, so it usually gets really cold. A couple of weeks ago, I took him to a game, and since I tend to get bored watching, I brought my girlfriend, Michelle, along to keep me company. By the end of the first period, my brother's team was down 4-0, and Michelle and I were losing interest fast. We decided to head off to a more secluded area of the park, not for anything inappropriate, just to smoke the stuff we brought with us. Michelle isn't a big smoker, but I can usually convince her to join me. The park where the rink is located is surrounded by dense forest, which the locals call the Burning Woods for obvious reasons. We found a spot behind a cluster of big trees and had just started lighting up when we heard footsteps approaching. In a panic, I quickly put the lighter and pipe away, my mind racing. The footsteps were accompanied by a chuckle, and soon enough, two guys appeared from the shadows. They looked to be in their mid-20s, one with a painfully cliché green mohawk and the other a big bald guy with a goatee. The guy with the mohawk laughed and said, "It's cool, don't worry about it. You got enough for two more." My first instinct was to tell them to buzz off, but for some reason, what came out of my mouth was, "Yeah, I think so." I'm not proud of it, but I'm a bit of a coward. I always think of the right thing to say in my head, but I never have the guts to actually say it. After I agreed, the guy with the mohawk told me he was just kidding and that he had some super dope Durban poison or something in his car if we were interested. I looked at Michelle, who shrugged, but I could tell she was just as uncomfortable as I was. Neither of us wanted to go with them. I looked back at the hockey game in the distance and said, "No, it's okay. We were just finishing up anyway." The guy just nodded and stuck out his hand for a high-five/handshake. I awkwardly shook his hand and then directed Michelle back toward the rink. We both agreed that those guys were weird, but we tried to brush it off. We stopped a little further away, deciding it was safe to finish our smoke after all. As Michelle lit the pipe, I heard footsteps again, rustling through the leaves. I glanced quickly to the side and saw the guy with the green mohawk standing behind a tree, his head peeking out just enough for me to see him. I did that thing with my eyes where I looked over in his direction to hint at Michelle that we weren't alone. I didn't want to confront the guy because by now, I was sure something was off about these two. We both heard the snap of a stick from right behind the tree we were standing near, and that was all I needed. I grabbed Michelle's arm and started walking back toward the rink, back into the lights. We made it out of the tree line and onto the path, but as we did, we heard one of the guys call out to us. We turned around, and there they were, standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 20 feet away, with those eerie smiles on their faces. Then I saw a third guy behind them, half hidden by a tree. "No, it's okay, guys, thanks," I yelled back, trying to sound casual, but inside I was panicking. I didn't dare turn my back on them as I nudged Michelle forward, quickening our pace toward the bleachers, which were now only about 50 feet away. I feared that if I turned around, I'd see a gun or something in their hands. We made it back safely to the bleachers, feeling a sense of relief being around other people. The game ended, and my brother's team lost 9-5. He stayed after a bit to talk with his coach, who was offering him a position on another team. By the time he was done, almost everyone had left, and there were only 3 cars left in the parking lot. As we got into my truck, I noticed a car behind us, tailgating as we pulled out of the lot. Then it started honking. My stomach dropped. I knew it was them. They must have waited for us in their car, targeting us for reasons I couldn't understand. By some stroke of luck, we didn't have to drive far. Parked on the corner of a side road, seemingly waiting to catch speeders, was a police car. We pulled up next to it, and the car behind us sped past. We quickly pointed to the car and told the officer that those guys had been harassing us. The cop nodded and said, "Okay," before rolling up his window again. I was hoping he'd chase them down, but he didn't. We drove home slowly, hoping to see the cops' lights flashing behind us, but nothing happened. Even now, weeks later, the whole situation still scares me. Every day I think about it and wonder what could have happened. All my life, I'll never forget this experience. I grew up with a close group of friends who all loved baseball. 6 of us were on the same team in a local league, and all 8 of us would play pickup games together whenever we could. We lived in a rural area, and there was this little-known clearing in the woods that had a baseball field and a basketball court. It was like our own private park. No one else ever seemed to be there because no one knew about it. We were all around 11 or 12 years old at the time, and living in the country meant our parents were a bit more lenient about letting us out unsupervised. This field was about a quarter-mile from my house, so I'd always walk there with my baseball bag, which had my bat, glove, and a few extra balls in it. That day started like any other. It was a Friday evening in mid-July, and the sky was turning that deep orange color as the sun began to set. We knew our game had to wrap up soon because it would be dark before long. I was up at bat when 2 of my friends out in the field pointed to something. We all turned to look and saw a group of men entering the clearing and sitting down on a nearby bench. There were 6 of them, and even now, I'd guess they were in their 20s or 30s. It didn't look like a gang, but they definitely weren't the kind of guys you'd want to run into in a dark alley. What was unsettling was how they just sat or stood there, watching us play baseball. I could see and hear them laughing, making a lot of noise. We all exchanged glances, silently agreeing that it was time to pack up. The sun was setting anyway, so it seemed like a good excuse to leave. As we were putting our stuff into our bags, the men started calling out to us, telling us not to leave. When we looked back at the bench, we saw all 6 of them standing, still watching us intently. You might think it's silly that a group of 8 kids would be scared just because some men entered the park, but you have to understand how they were staring at us. It wasn't normal. Here's where things got worse. I usually walked home alone because my house was in a different direction from everyone else's. I asked my friend Jordan to walk with me to the dirt path that led out of the clearing, just so it wouldn't be so obvious that I was on my own. We gave each other a quick high five and then went our separate ways. It was getting really dark now, especially in the woods, and that's why I always kept a flashlight in my baseball bag. Every snap and rustle in the underbrush made me jump, and I found myself constantly shining my light around in paranoia. My heart was racing. I just wanted to get home safely and crawl into my warm bed. Each step seemed louder than the last, and I was hyper aware of every sound. Then I heard laughter and screaming, not the playful sounds of my friends, but the deeper, more menacing voices of grown men. My pulse quickened, and I picked up the pace, not caring about the baseballs that fell out of my unzipped bag. I sighed in frustration, dropping my bag to hurriedly gather the balls with my flashlight. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot, coming from behind me. My heart stopped. I turned and shined my light, revealing a tall man in a black hoodie, the hood pulled low over his face. He was inching closer, but the moment my light found him, he broke into a full sprint toward me. Panic set in. I dropped everything, my flashlight, my baseball gear, and ran as fast as I could. I could hear him gaining on me, his footsteps pounding in my ears. It wasn't until I saw the lights from my house that I dared to scream for my mom and dad. My pursuer must have turned back because when I reached the safety of my house, he was gone. My parents were hysterical when I told them what happened. They called all 7 of my friends' parents to make sure everyone had gotten home safely. Thankfully they had, though Jordan said he was briefly followed too. He wasn't chased after he started running though. After that night, our parents forbade us from going back to that field. We still live in the same house, and it's unsettling to know that those men, one of them, or maybe all of them, know where I live. This is a story that has been told in my family for years, a chilling tale that still sends shivers down our spines every time it's brought up. It involves Lisa, my sister's girlfriend at the time, who was searching for her first apartment. She had just graduated from college and was eager to move out of her parents' house. Lisa and my sister had only been dating for a few months, so they decided not to move in together just yet. Instead, Lisa opted to find a roommate online. She spent days browsing through listings on Craigslist, hoping to find something within her budget. Eventually, she stumbled upon an ad that caught her eye. The title read, "Roommate Wanted, Females Only," which wasn't unusual in the area she was searching in, a suburb outside of Trenton, New Jersey. The rent was surprisingly low, just $250 a month, which was a steal compared to most of the other listings. The occupant described herself as a 24-year-old college student who preferred to live with another female. The ad seemed perfect. The roommate sounded like someone Lisa could get along with, and the place was within her price range. However, there was only one photo attached to the listing, a grainy image of the outside of the house. Despite this, Lisa was intrigued and decided to reach out. She sent an email expressing her interest and asked if she could come by to see the place. Within half an hour, she received a response. The girl, who introduced herself as Sarah, seemed eager to meet and suggested Lisa come by around 8 p.m. since she worked late hours. Lisa agreed, although the time struck her as a little odd. But the prospect of finding a place so affordable and seemingly ideal pushed her to overlook any reservations. When Lisa arrived at the address, she noticed a handwritten note taped to the front door. It read, "Door broken, use back door." She hesitated for a moment, the first pangs of unease creeping up her spine. But the house looked nice enough from the outside. Though it was a bit run down, the lawn was overgrown, and the windows were dusty. Still, nothing about it seemed too out of the ordinary. She walked around to the back of the house, where she knocked on the door. To her surprise, an older man answered. He was in his late 40s, with unkempt hair and a disheveled appearance. He wore a dirty flannel shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. For a moment, Lisa thought she had the wrong house, but the man quickly reassured her, saying that Sarah had asked him to meet her since she was working late. He introduced himself as Mark, the landlord. Lisa's unease grew, but she tried to push it aside. After all, maybe Sarah really did ask Mark to meet her. The man seemed pleasant enough at first, though there was something about his demeanor that didn't sit right with her. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and there was an odd, almost forced cheerfulness in his voice. As they entered the house, Lisa couldn't help but notice how dark it was inside. Only the kitchen light was on, casting long shadows in the dimly lit space. The house was eerily silent, with no sounds of life, no hum of appliances or creaks of settling wood. The first red flag was the complete lack of furniture. Every room they entered was empty, with nothing but bare walls and dusty floors. Mark guided her through the house, his answers to her questions becoming increasingly terse and irritable. He seemed eager to get the tour over with, turning off the lights as they left each room, as if trying to keep the electricity bill down. When they reached the hallway leading to the bedrooms, Lisa noticed a door with a large plank nailed across it. Mark explained that it was the front door, which was broken, hence the plank, but the sight of it sent a wave of dread washing over her. Finally, they reached the last door in the hallway. Mark didn't open it, explaining that it was Sarah's room and that he didn't want to invade her privacy. Lisa's discomfort had now turned into a gnawing fear. The house felt wrong, like a place where something terrible had happened or was about to. Sensing her growing unease, Mark suddenly brightened and said, "I almost forgot to show you the basement. It's newly furnished, would make a great rec room. You should definitely check it out." His tone was overly enthusiastic, almost too eager. They were standing in the small hallway between the living room and the kitchen, with the basement door directly in front of them. Mark opened the door, which creaked loudly, and gestured for Lisa to go down. The stairs descended into pitch-black darkness, and the basement looked like a black hole, swallowing any light that dared to enter. Mark smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Ladies first." Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to get out of there, but she felt trapped. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her friend, asking if she had seen the apartment yet. Thinking quickly, Lisa pretended it was a call and answered loudly, "Hey, are you here? Great. I'll come out front and meet you." She smiled politely at Mark, who looked momentarily confused, and said, "My friend is here. She wants to see the place too. I'll just go grab her. We'll be right back." Without waiting for a response, Lisa quickly walked around Mark, keeping her movements calm and deliberate, as if she wasn't afraid. But as soon as she was out the back door, she sprinted to her car, her heart racing with fear. She didn't stop until she was safely inside, the doors locked and the engine running. Without a second thought, she sped away from the house, the tires squealing on the pavement. When she got home, Lisa was still shaking. She told my sister and her parents everything that had happened. They called the police immediately, and an officer came by to take her statement. The next day, they went to the house to investigate, but by then, the Craigslist post had been taken down. What they found was chilling. The house had been foreclosed 6 months earlier and had been abandoned ever since. The room that Mark claimed was Sarah's was where he had been living. Inside, the walls were covered with ripped-up pages from adult magazines, and the floor was littered with dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs. But the most disturbing discovery was in the basement. The police found a thin piece of fishing twine tied across the stairs, about shin-high, designed to trip anyone walking down. The basement itself was empty, save for a pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box filled with rolls of tape. Lisa had narrowly escaped what could have been a horrific situation. The thought of what might have happened if she had gone down those stairs haunted her for a long time. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the most seemingly innocent situations can turn out to be the most dangerous. It was a warm summer night when I found myself scrolling through Craigslist, searching for a good deal on goalie equipment. I was only 14 at the time, with no job and barely any money, so I needed to find something cheap. I didn't care much about the condition of the gear. I just wanted to play. After about an hour of searching, I came across an ad that seemed too good to be true. The picture showed a full set of pads, a blocker, a glove, and a stick, all in great condition. The seller was asking for just $50, which was an absolute steal. My excitement outweighed any sense of caution, and I immediately contacted the seller through text. The seller responded quickly, asking me a few questions about myself. One of the questions was how old I was, which seemed a bit odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I told him I was 14, and he replied with something along the lines of, "It's great to see someone so dedicated at a young age." Looking back, I realized that should have been a red flag, but I was too eager to get the equipment to care. When I asked for his address, he suggested we meet somewhere close to my house instead. He didn't want me coming all the way to this place, which again, should have been suspicious, but I brushed it off. We agreed to meet in the parking lot of the local mall, which was just a short walk from my house. The next evening, I walked to the mall, the summer air warm and humid, with the distant sound of crickets filling the night. The parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few cars scattered here and there. I stood in the spot we had agreed on, nervously waiting for the seller to show up. After a few minutes, I heard a car horn honk, and I looked up to see a white van parked away from the other cars. My phone buzzed with a new text message. It was the seller, telling me he was in the white van and that I should come over. As I approached the van, I felt a growing sense of unease. The windows were tinted, and the van looked old and worn, like something you'd see in a crime show. I texted him back, asking him to come out with the equipment, but he insisted it would be easier to do the transaction inside the van. That was the moment when my instincts finally kicked in. Every horror story I'd ever heard about Craigslist transactions flashed through my mind. I knew I had to get out of there. Without responding, I turned on my heel and started walking quickly back towards the main entrance of the mall. As I walked away, I heard the van's engine roar to life. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the van pulling out of its parking spot, driving slowly in my direction. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. I cut through the parking lot, heading towards the residential streets behind the mall. The van followed, and when I looked back again, I saw there was now someone in the passenger seat as well. I knew I couldn't lead them to my house, so I made a sharp turn into a nearby alley, hoping to lose them. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and cut through a series of backyards, hopping over fences and ducking behind bushes. Finally, I found a hiding spot behind a tall hedge, where I crouched down, trying to quiet my breathing. I could hear the van's engine idling somewhere nearby, but I didn't dare peek out to see where it was. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of the engine faded, and I slowly stood up, cautiously making my way back towards my house. When I got home, I was shaking so badly that I could barely explain what had happened to my parents. They were furious and terrified, demanding to know why I hadn't called the police. But I hadn't gotten the van's license plate number, and the Craigslist ad had already been taken down. All we could do was report a suspicious white van to the local authorities. That night, I was too scared to sleep. I kept thinking about the van and the men inside it, wondering if they would come looking for me. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound of an engine outside my window. My heart stopped as I crept over to the window and peeked through the blinds. There, parked across the street, was the white van. As soon as I looked out, the van's headlights flicked on, and it sped away, disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep at all after that, and the image of that van still haunts me to this day. I never saw it again, but the fear that those men might have found out where I lived lingered in the back of my mind for years. I was trying to sell a dining room set on Craigslist, hoping to get at least $1,200 for it. It was a beautiful set, hardly used, but I lived out in the country where there weren't many potential buyers. After weeks of no offers, I finally got a call from someone who sounded interested. The man on the other end had a shaky voice, and there was something off about him, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He said he wanted to come by and see the set, so I gave him my address. He told me he'd be over within the hour, which surprised me because I didn't think anyone lived that close. I quickly dusted off the furniture and made sure everything looked perfect. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door and was immediately hit with a wave of discomfort. The man standing on my porch looked like he hadn't showered in days. He was wearing a dirty undershirt stained with sweat and food, and his pants were torn and hanging loosely around his waist. His hair was a greasy mess, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. He greeted me with a shaky hello in the same unnerving voice as before. Despite my better judgment, I invited him in, hoping to quickly show him the dining room set and get him out of my house. He walked in slowly, his eyes darting around the room as if he were casing the place. When he saw the dining room set, he let out a strange sound, something between a grunt and a sigh, and began walking around the table, running his hands over the surface. The way he touched the furniture made my skin crawl. It wasn't a normal inspection, it was more like he was caressing it, feeling every inch of the wood with an almost obsessive intensity. I tried to break the tension by mentioning the price, reminding him that I was asking for $1,200. He stopped, looked up at me, and gave me the most unsettling smile I had ever seen. "How about $500? He asked, his voice low and menacing. I let out a nervous laugh, thinking he was joking, but when his smile disappeared, replaced by a look of anger, I knew he was serious. "I'm sorry," I stammered, "but $500 is too low. The lowest I can go is $1,000. The man's demeanor changed instantly. His face twisted into a scowl, and he began pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. He put his hands on his head, as if trying to keep his thoughts from spilling out, and made strange noises, almost like growling. My heart was racing now. I needed to get this man out of my house. I apologized again, thanking him for coming and suggesting it was time for him to leave. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with a look of pure hatred. The tension in the room was suffocating. This man was much bigger than me, and I knew I didn't stand a chance if he tried to attack. As he stood there, his hand moved towards his back pocket, and I instinctively knew he was reaching for a weapon. I turned and bolted up the stairs, heading straight for my bedroom where I kept my .45 in the closet. I could hear him moving behind me as I ran, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I grabbed my gun, loaded it, and took cover behind the wall, peeking out just enough to see if he was following me. But when I looked down the stairs, he was gone. I slowly moved back towards my bedroom door, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the gun. I called the police, my voice barely above a whisper, and waited behind my bed, listening for any sound that might indicate he was still in the house. It felt like an eternity before I heard the sound of sirens outside. I stayed put, terrified that he might be just outside my door, waiting for me to make a move. But then I heard the police enter the house, calling out to me. I emerged from my hiding place, hands raised, and showed them my ID. The officers searched the house thoroughly, and after a few minutes, they came out with the man in handcuffs. They told me something that made my blood run cold. He had been hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. He hadn't left when I thought he had. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike. As they led him to the patrol car, he looked at me through the window with a look of such malice and hatred that it still haunts me to this day. It was the look of someone who would come back for revenge. I knew I couldn't stay in that house after what happened. The constant paranoia, the fear that he might come back, was too much to bear. I moved away shortly after, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But the memory of that man, and the chilling encounter in my own home, will stay with me forever. I joined a gym for the first time 3 months ago. Honestly, a gym is the last place you'd expect something terrifying to happen, but last week, I had the most horrifying experience of my life. I usually wear wireless headphones when I go to the gym because wired ones always get in the way, and they're just plain annoying. Sometimes I leave my phone on a workout machine when I walk over to the water fountain. When the phone gets too far from the headphones, the connection gets staticky before disconnecting. It had happened a couple of times before when I wandered too far from my phone, so I was familiar with the signal dropping. One late night last week, I was one of the last people left in the gym. I was on one of those seated leg press machines, pushing through my final set of 20 reps. As I neared the end of my set, the music in my headphones started to get staticky, signaling that my headset had disconnected from my phone. I stopped mid-set, reaching over to the phone compartment on top of the machine, and my heart sank when I couldn't find my phone. It wasn't there. Panic set in as I looked around the gym, scanning for any sign of my phone. There were only 2 other people in the entire gym, not counting the guy sitting at the front desk. One of them was a heavy-set guy drenched in sweat, and the other was a man sitting on one of the machines, staring down at his phone. I had no idea which one of them, if either, could have taken my phone. Reluctantly, I decided to approach the guy who was sitting with his phone. He had earbuds in, so when I walked up to him, he looked at me with a puzzled expression, clearly annoyed that I was interrupting him. He took one earbud out, and I firmly asked, "Did you take my phone?" He stared at me in silence for a couple of seconds before replying with a cold no. His attitude was obvious. Despite his rudeness, I didn't press the issue. Instead, I asked if he had seen anyone else walk by recently, and he just shook his head without saying a word. For some reason, I stupidly thanked him and walked away, though deep down, I wanted to tell him off for being such a jerk. I went straight to the front desk and asked a worker if he could check the security cameras to see who might have taken my phone. As the guy at the desk clicked around on his computer, the rude guy I had just spoken to walked past me and out the exit. The worker finally turned the screen so I could see it and played a video clip that made my stomach drop. It showed the guy who had just walked out, the one with the attitude, taking my phone. I thanked the employee and bolted for the door, hoping to catch the guy before he got too far. But when I got outside, he was already gone, vanished into the night. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Just the day before, I had disabled the passcode on my phone for convenience. That meant whoever had my phone now had access to everything. My apps, texts, photos, emails, all of it. I went back inside and asked the employee to track the guy's membership info, but when he checked the cameras again, it turned out that the guy hadn't even checked in. He had simply walked past the counter unnoticed, meaning there were no records of him being a member. The footage showed him suspiciously wandering around the gym, looking around nervously like he was up to something. I asked the employee to report it to the police, and he assured me he would show it to his boss the next morning. The next day, I called my best friend, Alex, to let him know why I wouldn't be answering texts for a while and to ask him to spread the word to our other friends about what happened. Alex started freaking out on the phone, begging me to tell him I was joking about losing my phone. When I insisted that I was serious, he told me someone had been texting him and had even come to this house, pretending to be me. I didn't understand at first, so he said he'd come over to show me. 10 minutes later, Alex arrived at my house and showed me a long text conversation between him and someone using my phone, pretending to be me. It started with the person on my phone texting, "Hey, can I crash at your place tonight? I got into a huge fight with my parents." Alex, thinking it was me, replied, "Yeah, no problem. Just let me know when you're coming over." Then the imposter texted, "Can you leave your back door unlocked? I'll be over really late, and I don't want to wake you." The conversation went on for a while longer, with Alex finally agreeing to leave his back door unlocked, believing it was me who would be coming over. Alex had gone back to sleep, thinking his friend was going to show up at some point during the night, but when he woke up the next morning, he found his house had been ransacked. The stranger had taken advantage of Alex's trust, entering through the unlocked back door and helping himself to valuables while Alex slept upstairs. We immediately rushed to Alex's house and checked the security camera footage. My heart pounded as we watched the man from the gym, the one who had stolen my phone, walking into Alex's house through the back door. The footage showed him rummaging through the place, grabbing expensive items and stuffing them into his pockets. Then he moved from the den to the kitchen and eventually made his way upstairs. The look of fear on Alex's face was palpable as we watched the man open the door to his bedroom, step inside for about 20 seconds, and then come back out, leaving the door ajar. The man had been in Alex's house for about 10 minutes before sneaking back out through the same door he had entered. We sent the footage to the police, and when I went back to the gym, the manager assured me she would be sending their footage as well. But 3 months later, we still hadn't heard anything from the police. Whoever that man was, he had gotten away with everything. My phone, Alex's belongings, and most terrifying of all, entering Alex's house while he slept. I currently go to a 24-hour gym in my town, which is usually pretty quiet, even during the day. But at night, it's practically a ghost town. I've always wondered how they manage to stay open 24/7 with so few people coming in, especially during the late hours. One night, I had to work late to cover for a co-worker's shift, so I didn't get off until 11 p.m. I decided to head straight to the gym for a quick workout before calling it a night. When I arrived, the place was completely empty, just me and the silence of the gym. After about 10 minutes of working out, I finally spotted someone else in the gym. It was a guy wearing a beanie and a hoodie, which struck me as odd given how warm it was inside. I was already sweating just from my workout, so seeing him dressed like that made me feel uncomfortable. As I continued my workout, I noticed the guy was staring at me. Not just a casual glance, but an intense, unblinking stare. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was just zoning out or something, but it became clear that he was deliberately watching me. I kept sneaking glances at him, and every time he was still staring. It felt like he was challenging me, trying to assert some sort of dominance. I couldn't take the staring anymore, so I decided to move to a different section of the gym, hoping to get some peace. I found an empty area and started doing bicep curls in front of the mirror, trying to focus on my form and block out the unsettling encounter. But as I glanced in the mirror, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The guy in the beanie was hiding behind one of the chest press machines, peeking out at me through a small gap between the machine's lifting mechanism and the weights. His eyes were locked on me, staring with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. When he realized I had seen him, he quickly moved out of sight, disappearing behind the machine. I'm not the type of person who confronts others easily, especially in situations like this, so instead of saying anything, I put the weights down and left the room. My heart was pounding as I walked straight to the front desk and asked the girl working there to tell the man to either stop staring at me or leave the gym. She looked down the aisle of workout machines but didn't see anyone. I asked her to come with me to the back room where I had last seen him. She was clearly hesitant, but eventually she agreed to follow me. We searched the entire room, but the man was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Feeling uneasy, I apologized to the girl and asked her to keep an eye out for the guy in the beanie. She nodded and returned to her desk while I tried to finish my workout, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the guy to pop out from behind a machine again. After another 10 or 15 minutes, I decided I'd had enough and called it a night. As I left the gym, I waved goodbye to the girl at the front desk and headed to my car. Just as I was about to unlock the door, I heard rapid footsteps behind me, the sound of someone running on the pavement. I turned around, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the man in the beanie sprinting towards me from the darkness. For a split second, I was frozen in fear. But then adrenaline kicked in. I jumped into my car and slammed the door shut, locking it just in time. The man reached the car and yanked on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour fitness center in New Jersey. It was a job I had a love-hate relationship with. On the one hand, I loved it because very few people would come in during the deep night hours, which meant less work for me. On the other hand, I hated it because I had to spend those graveyard hours sitting at a desk, doing nothing while everyone else was asleep. You wouldn't expect anything strange to happen at a gym, especially at night, but one incident during my time there still haunts me. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sitting in a chair behind the counter, reading a magazine to pass the time. Out of natural curiosity, I looked up to see if anyone was in the gym. There was only one guy pacing slowly down the gym, looking around as if he was searching for something. He made a left turn past the wall that separated the front section of the gym from the back, disappearing from my view. I went back to reading, but about 10 minutes later, the entire gym was plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, leaving the place in complete silence. All the lights were off, and the music that had been playing over the speakers was dead. It was so dark that I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me. Thank God for smartphones and their flashlights. I turned mine on and tried to figure out what to do next. I knew there was a power box in one of the storage rooms connected to the back section of the gym, the same section where the guy had disappeared to earlier. I made my way there, calling out for the patron as I walked. My voice echoed through the pitch-black gym, but there was no response. The silence was unnerving, and the dim beam of my phone's flashlight only made the shadows seem more menacing. When I reached the storage area, I found the power box and started flipping every switch I could find, hoping to restore the lights, but nothing worked. The gym remained in darkness. Since I couldn't figure out how to fix the power, I decided it was best to close up for the night and wait for Kathy, the gym's owner, to come in the morning and sort it out. But first, I needed to find that guy. I did a thorough sweep of the entire back section, checking behind all the equipment and even the janitorial closets, but he was nowhere to be found. The only place left to check was the women's bathroom. I opened the door and called out again, my voice echoing in the empty bathroom. Still no answer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. With my flashlight in hand, I carefully checked every inch of the bathroom, making sure I didn't miss anything. The only places left to check were the stalls. As I reached for the door to one of the stalls, I heard it, a sick, raspy breathing, like something out of a nightmare. My hand froze on the door handle, and I called out again, "Are you in there?" No response. I dropped to my knees and shined the flashlight under the stall door. My heart nearly stopped when I saw 2 legs standing inches from my face, right behind the door. Whoever it was, they were standing perfectly still, as if waiting for me to make the next move. I shot up from the floor, my heart pounding, and bolted out of the bathroom. I ran back to the front desk, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do next. I tried calling Kathy, but of course, she was asleep. I left 2 voicemails, explaining what had happened and asking her to call me as soon as she could. With no other options, I called the police, explaining that there was a suspicious person in the gym and that I was 90% sure they had cut the power. I hung up, feeling more alone and terrified than ever as I sat in the dark, silent gym, waiting for the police to arrive. Suddenly, I heard a metallic clanging sound from across the gym, like one of the machine's weights being dropped. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the noise and called out again, telling the person that the gym was closed and that they needed to leave. And then I saw it, a face, just at the edge of the flashlight's beam, staring back at me from between 2 machines. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Just then, the blue and red lights of a police car lit up the front of the gym, and I ran to open the door for the officer. He greeted me, flashlight in hand, and began searching the entire gym, including the bathrooms and closets. But when he returned, he told me the place was empty. He suggested that whoever it was had probably left through the back door and advised me to lock up and come back in the morning. That's exactly what I did. When I returned to the gym the next morning, Kathy was already there. She told me it had been a simple power outage the night before. Together, we checked the security camera footage, looking for any sign of the guy I had seen. But to our shock, there was nothing. No footage of him entering the gym, no footage of him working out, nothing. It was as if he had never been there. Kathy looked at me like I was crazy, but I was too stunned to care. I know what I saw, and I know there was someone in the gym that night. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened, but I'll never forget the terror I felt in that dark, silent gym.